to help make this possible. And so now I get the delight and the honor to introduce to you our teacher and our preacher this evening. Rabbi Dr. Pankin is the president of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, which is, of course, the institution that ordains all of your rabbis and all of the Reform rabbis that there are in North America. And not only that, HUC is important and precious because it not only produces rabbis, but cantors, credentialed Reform Jewish educators, Jewish communal service workers, and those graduate students who go on to serve the world of academia with the tools that they gained at that terrifically important organization and institution of our movement. Rabbi Panken has taught at HUC for a number of years. He's also served in an administrative capacity, serving as its vice president for strategic initiatives, as well as its dean and dean of students in the New York campus. His academic work has centered on the concept of legal change in rabbinic literature. In addition to his long list of academic and institutional credentials, Rabbi Panken is also a certified commercial pilot, which is quite interesting, and a sailor. So he has a terrific background that I hope all of you will have an opportunity to listen to and learn from at some point. Besides all of the professional accolades and institutional credentials that I need to mention, I also just have to say that I am very delighted to have my friend and my teacher here. Rabbi Panken is an important person in our movement, in our seminary, in our community, but also in the hearts of myself, my rabbinic colleagues here, who love and cherish him as a teacher and as a friend, as a great leader of our important movement. And so it is a real delight for me to welcome our guest preacher for this evening, Rabbi Dr. Panken.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I know that the next time Rabbi Hayon introduces me, I'm bringing my mother. That's the thing. So I was just not going to miss that opportunity. So first of all, good evening. It's wonderful to be here. I'm delighted to be here for so many reasons. But what I realized when I walked in is that there are a number of people I'm very close with here, including people I've married and people whose children I haven't seen in many, many years or even really very much at all before. And it's just wonderful to be here. And I'm actually quite happy to be back in Houston. I've been here a couple of times, and it's really wonderful to spend time here. So thank you for the warm welcome this evening. I will add what a great source of pride it is for me to see our alumni doing such incredible things and the way they lead this congregation. So to look at Rabbi Silk, Rabbi Khan, I know is not here tonight. Of course, Rabbi Walter, who, by the way, this congregation was kind enough to endow a scholarship in his name, which supports a student of ours at the Cincinnati campus. And your most important and wonderful addition, most recently, Rabbi Hayon, which I think was an inspired choice, and I'm really delighted to see him already doing such wonderful work in this congregation. Cantor Perman as well, thank you so much for the beautiful music, wherever you are, as well as, thank you. It was a beautiful service tonight. And Shelby, where's Shelby? Shelby? I got a spot in the class of 2048 for you. I just want to tell you that, so that's good. Two quick words about what the College Institute does, though Rabbi Hayon has already done a beautiful job of telling you. We train rabbis, cantors, Jewish educators. We train those who are Jewish communal service professionals who lead Jewish organizations. We have PhD programs in our Cincinnati campus for Jews and for non-Jews alike. In fact, in the South, I hear that Texas is not part of the South. Is that true? All right, so in Texas as well and in the Midwest, we have a number of people who are Christian graduates of our program serving in churches and seminaries and Bible colleges and actually teaching because HUC made them PhDs. And it's a wonderful interfaith kind of thing. And the last thing I want to mention is to let you know that Professor Dahlia Marks being here tonight is actually quite important. Because Hebrew Union College, our campus in Jerusalem, is fighting the good fight and the important fight and making sure that there is Reform Judaism in Israel. Without the 92, I ordained the 92nd Israeli Reform Rabbi in November. Those 92 Israeli Reform rabbis are out there fighting for equality for Reform rabbis, for women, making sure that Israel is a place that stands up and lives for the values it should. And that's absolutely critical. And Professor Marks being here tonight is a wonderful sign of the connection between Israel and the United States and North America that is so important to us. So tonight, here's what I'd like to do. For the next 65 minutes, only kidding. I love that line. That's fantastic. So what I'd like to do in a few minutes, in about 12 minutes, okay? This part doesn't count, right? Is that okay? Okay, good. All right. So what I'd like to do in the next 12 minutes is the following. I'd like to share with you 3 texts. I know that I put 4 on the pages. We're going to skip a text at the end for purposes of time. What I'd like to do is share with you 3 texts that I think point to very important moments, ideas, principles that must be part of what we think about as Reformed Jews in North America, in Israel, and everywhere else we go in the world. And the reason I do this is because I'm a Talmud professor. I should never go anywhere without a text. I think Jews, the one thing we all have in common throughout the entire Jewish world, no matter whether you're Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, we have the same sacred texts. We share these texts, and that's how we communicate, and that's how we connect with one another. So I'm going to show you 3, maybe 4 texts, and in those texts what I'd like to do is to bring out what I consider to be 3 very important principles of what it means to be a Reformed Jew. So that when tomorrow or next week someone says to you, "You're a Reformed Jew? What does that mean?" you will actually have a good, hopefully cogent answer that you can give them, which tells what it is that we really stand for in the Reform movement. So, number 1, many stories but one tradition. Going to the book of Genesis, there is the story of Noah. Noah is a very common story. Everyone's familiar with it. What happens in the book of Noah, or the book of Genesis about Noah? Noah is the only righteous person in his generation, or the most righteous person in his generation. He is chosen by God to build an ark. He builds an ark, animals go on it, they float around for 40 days. This is the abridged story, I'm telling it rather quickly. And at the end of 40 days, he pops up somewhere in Turkey, we think, or somewhere in the Middle East, and once again, he reestablishes the entire world after all the other human beings have been killed. Kind of a grim story, but interesting because it lines up with many ancient stories that have to do with the idea of a flood. But here's what's interesting about the Noah story. We're going to focus on a very small little piece of it that's really fascinating. Take a look at Genesis 6, 17 through 20, which is the first paragraph. We're going to compare it to Genesis 7, 1 through 3. And I'm going to point out 3 things that I think are important in the differences between these 2 passages. So let's read. "For my part," God says, "I am about to bring the flood, waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. But I, God, will establish my covenant with you, Noah, and you shall enter the ark. You shall take you with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. And of all that lives of all flesh, you shall take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female. From birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive." It makes a lot of sense. You need 1 male and 1 female to make the next generation, as far as I can tell. There are new ways nowadays, but that was the way it used to work in the old world, okay? So you need 1 male and 1 female animal. But there are a couple of problems with the story. It is not impossible that an animal might die during the 40 days, right? It's also not impossible that an animal might not be able to produce a child, right? An offspring. So there are some interesting problems if we just take 1 of each, right? That's one challenge. The other interesting thing here is notice the complete variety. Birds of every kind, cattle of every kind. If you think about it, you got to build a pretty large ship to actually make it possible to bring 1 of each of these kinds, right? So there's a couple of interesting things going on just in this passage. But now compare it to the next passage. So Genesis 7, this is only about 15 verses later. "Then God said to Noah, 'Go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found to be righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean animal you shall take 7 pairs, males and their mates, and of every animal that is not clean, 2, a male and its mate. Of the birds of the sky also 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon the earth.'" So here we are, friends, in the Torah, in the middle of the Torah, and about 10, 15 verses apart, we've got some interesting, what you might call contradictions that are here. The contradictions include the following things. One story says a male and a female animal, which is 2, as far as my counting goes, right? The other story says 7 of the pure animals, but 2 of the impure animals. And with the birds, all 7, even though it only says 2 in the first story. So there's a couple of differences. 1, a difference in number. 2, the difference of the injection of the concept of purity, the idea that some animals are pure and other animals are impure. And then there's the question of all the different kinds of animals and the vast quantity of animals you would have to take with you on this. So here's the interesting thing. There are ways to deal with this. You can say, well, the 2 that are listed in the first story really represent the 2 pure ones that are listed in the second story. You can harmonize the problem away. You can say that both of these make sense and there's no issue, let's forget about it. And that's what many commentators did, and many folks who believe in the divinity of the Torah given from Mount Sinai would say that that's a very simple way to get rid of that problem. The Reform movement instead, interestingly, takes a look at something like this and says, you know what? Based on biblical scholarship, based on since the 18th century, Christian and Jewish scholars have been looking at the Bible, and they notice that the first story comes from one time period, a time period when purity and other kinds of concerns weren't that important and may have been told orally for many centuries and then eventually written down. And the second story comes from a different time period. And you know what? That actually indicates that Judaism, even within the Torah, develops and changes. So what's interesting about this to begin with, number 1, my first major point. So pay attention now, okay? My first major point is that what happens here is that we've got an idea that there is development within Jewish tradition. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the idea that there is development within Jewish tradition. And even within the Torah itself, there is this sense of development. So, number 1, Jewish tradition grows and changes. It responds to the times. New concepts get injected. And over time, things move from place to place and become different. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why we're called Reform Jews, because Reform Jews didn't reform once in history. We actually reform constantly. There's an old saying, reform is a verb, and reform changes and grows over time and responds to new situations. And that's actually a tremendous strength of Reform Judaism. Let me go into the second text. Second text is from Pirkei Avot. It is a text that's written probably sometime in the 2nd century CE, at least compiled, though it probably was orally compiled and orally collected over many years before that. In Pirkei Avot 5:21, in the sayings of our ancestors, we find the following statement. He used to say, at 5, one begins the study of the Bible. At 10, the Mishnah. At 13, the mitzvot, the commandments. At 15, the Talmud. At 18, one is ready for marriage. I want to focus on that for just a minute for all of you who are 18. That's very important. Get out there and get that done. Okay? At 20, you can pursue a living. Now, that's kind of interesting that marriage comes before pursuing a living. I might say don't try that at home, but you can decide what you want to do. At 30, strength. At 40, understanding. At 50, advice. At 60, old age. At 70, the fullness of age. Sorry, by the way. At 80, strong old age. At 90, one is bent, which you're not, thank God, so that's great. And at 100, it is if one has already died and passed from this world. Now, by the way, I hope there's no one 100 here. I did not mean to be offensive, but in the old days, living to 100 was an unbelievable thing. Nobody really did it, frankly. So we live in a very different world. Things have changed, obviously. But here's what's the same. What's the same is a commitment to learning that goes on and on and on. Learning never changes. You're always learning. You're always studying. You're always committed to life cycle events, to being with your spouse, to being connected to what's happening in your family. And as the years go by, you gain through experience this incredible sense of strength. A second important piece of Reform Judaism, major point number 2, is that Reform Judaism brings the entirety of the life cycle, every moment that you have, whether it's what we saw tonight, the naming of a baby, whether it's a funeral where there's sadness in your family. Our rabbis, cantors, educators, our congregations are structured to be there with you throughout every moment. And that learning that this text points to is something that we try to make sure is inculcated from the very minute someone is born. At your bris, we set you up for it, right? At your brit milah, when you're circumcised, we say, may you have Torah, chuppah, and ma'asim tovim. May you have Torah, may you have a marriage, and may you have good deeds. So immediately from the 8th day of your life, if you're a boy, and in baby naming ceremonies for girls, we do it too, we're looking forward to this idea of study and commitment going forward. So our movement is very much committed to this idea of ongoing study, making ourselves better, more knowledgeable Jews, and ultimately being there for every part of the life cycle. Turn with me to the last text we'll take a look at tonight. Number 3, Divergent Practice. One of the most interesting things that you will find if you look at the Talmud, and we tend sometimes to have an image of Jews in the past only doing it in a certain way and only doing it one way. But I want to shatter that image for you a little bit tonight, because the reality is that even back long ago, there was tremendous diversity of practice. And here's one proof among thousands that I could give you from the Talmud. Our rabbis taught the mitzvah of the Hanukkah lamp is one per man and his household. All right? I know a pre-feminist text, we could have said one per household. That would have been better. But in the Talmud, this is the way that one thought generally. And for the more observant, one for each person. And for the even more observant, the house of Shammai say on the first night one lights 8 lamps, and then subtracts 1 lamp each night. And Beit Hillel, the house of Hillel, say on the first night one lights 1 lamp, and then adds 1 lamp per night. So notice this. Hanukkah I know is over, but nonetheless we can still talk about it. It's okay. Hanukkah was celebrated in at least 4 ways in this passage. There were single lights for the whole family. There were 1 light per person in the family. There were those who counted up from 1 to 8 every night, adding 1, and there were those who counted down from 8 to 1. So notice the fact that when we think about the Jewish community, there are always going to be people who disagree with us, always going to be people who look at things in a different way. And the beauty of Reform Judaism is that we don't actually have to say, just because you disagree with us, just because you do something differently, you're bad. Instead, what we can say is, we have a proud tradition. We have always been a people where there have been many different possibilities within our religion, and we actually enjoy that. I like the fact that when I go to the Hebrew Union College and I sit with students and they're having lunch, I can have a student who will keep kosher sitting next to a student who doesn't keep kosher, sitting next to another student who tried it for a while and decided not to do it anymore, sitting next to another student who is the most glatt kosher person I've met in a long time. And they all sit at the same table, and they have to have the conversation about what it means and what's meaningful to them. And that's the beauty of Reform Judaism that I will leave you with tonight, this amazing sense of a giant tent filled with people who care about Judaism, who love Judaism, who want to be active in the world and make the world a better place through Judaism, but are not willing to say that just because you disagree with me, you're wrong. Instead, we would rather learn from one another and make a community that gets better through that kind of learning. So I want to say, finally, as a closing thought, thank you very much, and please feel part of the Hebrew Union College family. We have campuses in New York, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, and Jerusalem. Your rabbis can certainly send you to us, but you should know that as part of a Reform congregation, your support for us is quite palpable and actually quite realistic, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for that. And I hope that when you're in one of those cities, especially Jerusalem, if you would like to bring your family to visit, if you'd like to have a bar bat mitzvah on our campus, bring a congregational trip, anything you'd like to do, you should feel, as they say, babayit. You should feel at home in all that you do, because we're really part of the same Reformed Jewish family. Thanks so much for having me tonight, and Shabbat Shalom.